So in this video, I'll be showing all of you how to make a repeatable floor tile in Aseprite. So this is going to be a 16 by 16 tile. Feel free to do a 8 by 8 or 32 by 32 if you prefer. We'll also add in shadows, which are optional. And I'll show you a couple ways that you can mix up your tile so that you're not repeating the same thing over and over again every single time you use it. So the first thing I'll go ahead and do is fill in a background color. So anything you want to select as your color base, you can hit G to use the paint bucket tool in Aseprite and then left click in your tile to fill it. And now I'll go ahead and select another color so that we can add some detail to this tile. So for this tile, I'll have four corners. Two of them are going to have this light blue shade, and then I'll just fill this in with the paint bucket. And then the bottom right one will have this light blue as well, and the other two will be this dark blue color. So this could work for something like a kitchen or bathroom tile. Now, when you're creating a tile that you're going to be repeating in a game, the most important thing is going to be, of course, to make sure that it can tile seamlessly. So one way you can check that is you go up to the view menu at the top and you go down to tiled mode, and then you can select tiled in both axes. So in Aseprite, this takes our base tile and then just duplicates it 8 extra times in all of the directions surrounding our base tile. To see the base tile better, we can go to View and then go down to Show and Grid here. And now you can see these tiles separated with this little blue line. It's a little hard to see since I selected blue colors as the base, but if I temporarily drew around it, like this, you'd be able to see it really easily. So those are our 9 tiles. And as you can see, as I move the cursor around, anytime I was to use the pencil tool, which is B on the keyboard, and I put a couple of pixels down, it's just going to duplicate all around it since it is a mirroring of the base tile. So I'll hit Control Z here a few times. So for this tile, it's really easy to get it to tile since we're just dealing with squares. But if I had something like a diagonal here, like let's say I go from the top left to the bottom right, and I kept doing diagonals, then you could probably see after a while you might run into some mistakes where it just doesn't line up properly when you keep doing it. So if, for instance, if I put this little pixel at the corner here, both the top right and the bottom left corner, you can see that we get this 4 pixel square here. So it's not tiling like we would expect it to, unless we actually want that 4 pixel block square at the corners. So you got to be careful, and that's one of the things that this tile grid helps you to catch. So if you have it tiling in both axes and you look at your 9 tiles here, but you can't really tell where one starts and the other ends, that's going to be what you want. Seamlessness with your tile and all of the duplicates of it. So now to take this tile and add shadows to it so that you could use it in a room, and on those edges where walls would be casting a shadow onto the tile, you can have your tile support that as well. So the way we're going to do this is basically taking our tile and creating 6 duplicates of it, which are going to have varying levels of shadows in different directions. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on our base square here, and you can see that makes a rectangular marquee selection around our tile. And then we can hit Command or Control Shift, and then we copy it with Control C. And then I'm going to go to a new document here. So let's make the width ×3 and the height ×2. So a 48 by 32 pixel document, which is going to have 6 squares. So hit OK here, and I'm going to Command V, paste it in, and I'm going to bring this to the bottom left. So I want to make 5 additional copies of this. So Command V, and we'll have one up there. Command V again, move it over here, and just keep doing this until you fill in all of the corners. So in the bottom here, I'm going to rename this layer base tile. Then I'm going to hit Shift N to create a new layer, and I'll rename this the shadow layer. So one of the reasons I think it's important to have a separate shadow layer is that you can edit this without being destructive to the underlying tiles. And one of the reasons I will have a separate shadow layer is so that we can make changes without being destructive to the underlying base tile layer. So we can add shadows on top of it, and we could turn that off anytime we wanted by hiding the layer. So the way I've been doing shadows is rather than selecting a color here, what I will actually do is just go take the color picker in the bottom left, turn that to black, and then open up the color details. Make sure the color here is all set to 0, but then the alpha, I'm going to make that 50. So what this is basically doing is taking black color with an alpha of 50 or about 20% opacity, which means with 20% opacity, 80% of the underlying color is going to show through. So although we're coloring with black, it's going to appear like it's a mix between the two colors from the pixel on top, the shadow color, and what's below it. So before we go ahead and color the shadow in, let's go to View, Show, Grid, so that we can see these individual tiles. So each tile, once again, is going to have a different amount of shadow. So when I add the shadow in, I want it to be a 5 pixel border. This top left tile is going to have shadow on the left and shadow on the top. So I'm going to work on the top first. You can hit M to go to the rectangular selection tool. And then I'm going to pull 5 pixels down and then all the way over here to the right until we get to that third tile. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pixels in. So the top left tile, once again, it has shadows on the left and the top. That would be your top left corner in a room. The next tile over is shadows on the top down and only there. So that would be anything else that borders the top wall. And then over here on the right is a shadow for a corner piece. So I'll hit G to go to paint bucket fill mode, and I'm going to fill it in with the black with 50 out of 255 opacity. So I'll just click there, and there we have a shadow. So we're also going to need to do the same thing downwards. So let's bring that shadow down. Now note that we only have 2 tiles vertically, so we're not doing that corner tile piece right there where it just sticks out a little bit. So I'm just going to fill this space in with the same black shadow color. And then in the bottom right hand corner, when you have a tile that you want to be fully enveloped in a shadow, you can just double click on that bottom right tile, G to paint bucket fill, and left click and put that in. So we have the tile with no shadows, the tile with left shadow, tile with corner shadow, tile with top shadow, and then the tile where it just sticks out a little bit in the top left. So with these, you could tile a room and have shadows. Anytime you just want to have a room that has no shadows at all, on the ground at least, you could just use this tile and just repeat it over and over again. Okay, so if I take this into a new test document, we can see that we can just kind of make the floors of a room now. So I'll have this up here, and let's copy this piece, and we'll just paste it in a bunch of times. So I'm using Control-C, Control-V to copy paste. We can see that works just fine. And then we can start bringing in these other pieces. So one of the reasons for having these 3 in the top left is that you can just kind of select them all at once. Control-V, paste them in here. And then you have a corner and the 2 adjacent pieces as well. But let's copy this one again. Okay. And then going downwards as well. So you can imagine if we had some walls in here. Actually, we don't really need to imagine that. Let's just create some walls. So I'll just double click the layers I want to fill, and let's just fill in some fake walls. That would be one way you could tile a room. So next, I want to show how you could actually break up the flow of these tiles so that it's not just repeating the exact same pattern over and over again. So let's go back over to this sheet where we have the tiles. I'm going to duplicate this base tile layer. So I'm going to right click it, choose duplicate, and I'll hide the underlying base tile. So what I'll do to kind of break this up a little bit is I'll actually just take this tile, and you can just double click on any grid square to select everything inside of it. If you're not getting the selection you want, you can go up to View, Grid settings, and just make sure this is 16 by 16 or whatever your tile size is. And what we can do with this content is rotate it. So I'm going to come up to the top right-hand corner, and I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees. You can hold shift down to make sure that you get a precise -90 there at the bottom. So we can see how by rotating this tile, if we would have put it with the original tile, we'd get a totally different floor pattern. So now I'm going to copy this over to our 5 shadow squares. So Command-C, Command-V, and let's paste it into those other squares. So we can see the way that I was doing shadows by using a black with 50 opacity out of 255, that we're able to basically keep the shadows intact. We don't have to redo everything. We just need to put the new tile underneath the shadows that existed before, and it will work for any color setup rather than having to manually just put in a darker shade of the color wherever the shadow happens to hit. So now we'll take this and use it over on this little floor map. So if you want to copy everything here at once, including the shadow, make sure that you do copy merged up here. So this would require you to hit shift as well when you're doing the command C or control C copy. So I'm going to paste this in here with the shadows intact. And now we can use this in the room. So let's take this square. I'm going to copy it over to these areas. And we can see how we can break up the flow by using a different tile that still kind of matches our original. So let's add those in there. I guess to kind of random places. As long as the tiles work seamlessly with each other, you don't have to follow a specific pattern, I guess. Let's just make sure that when you do get to the edges here, where there should be a shadow, that you use the correct tile though. So I'm gonna paste this up there. Okay, and we can see that the shadow here is gonna line up with the other tiles. Paste this one again. And we can see with these tiles that have a pattern to them, as long as it's seamless, you can often get a interesting result just by kind of rotating them. So here's kind of another example you can take a quick look at. So I had this base tile, and it seems like I did something to it though. You can still see the pattern I was going for, where basically this faces a certain direction, but by rotating it and having alternating pieces, so this one and this one are the same, and then this one and this one are the same, you can make a totally different pattern just by alternating slightly different tiles that have just had a rotation change. So for the last part of this video, I want to show how you can take a tile and create variations of it. And then when you're in a program like Tiled or Godot, you can assign a random priority to those tiles depending on the frequency you'd like them to appear, or you can just manually put in a alternate version of the tile when you want to. So I'll quickly show how to do that. So here we have the original tile on the left. I'm going to hit M to make sure I'm in the marquee rectangular selector. Then I'm going to double click on this tile and copy it over to these two adjacent spaces. I can also go ahead and make sure the grid's on, view, show grid. And now with these other two spaces, we can create a variation tile, just something that's a little bit different when we don't want it to appear the same in every single space. So here, I'll just add a few dots as a different kind of tile. And then over here on the right, I'll just add something to kind of give the illusion of some damage to the tile. So let's just kind of add a little crevice in the center here. And one thing to note is that if you add the changes to the inside, not the outside, then it's going to still seamlessly tile with everything else. So that's one reason I'm putting it in the center here. Let's change that so it's a little lighter. And then down here, I guess we can have the darker tiles. So it's something there. I guess that'll work just for right now as a random tile variation. So when you have your tile variations created, we can import them into a program like Tiled in order to draw with them with randomly selecting between these three tiles with a given probability for each one. So if I go over to Tiled here in a new tile set file, I can add a tile set in the bottom right. So let's click on new tile set, and we want to base this off of a PNG image. So I'm going to browse to where I have that tile set saved on the computer, tile variations tutorial. Let's open that. And then let's save the tile set file, the tiled version of this, not the PNG, into a folder where we'll reference later on. So I'm just going to replace this existing file. And there we have our asset brought in to a new tile set. So when you left click on each of these tiles, note that the tile set was set up with 16 by 16 pixel tiles by default. So that's how it knows to select between these. We can select each of them and give them a probability value. So this will be used when we are drawing, selecting all three of these with the random paint on tool. So we want to assign a probability for how often we want each of these to appear. So just leave the base tile as 1.0 as a good reference point for these other tiles. Let's say that we want this one here to appear about 1 out of 10 times that the one on the left appears. So we just want 1/10 of the probability, 0.1 there. And let's say that we want this other tile to appear 1 out of 20 times that this one on the left appears. So we want 0.05 or basically 5% of the appearance rate as this other tile. So if we save this tile set and we go over to the tile map file, which as you can see in the bottom right, now shows our 3 tiles, which we can individually select and paint onto this tile map if we prefer, or we can select all 3 of these. So if you left click, hold shift down, and then left click on the one on the far right, it'll grab everything in between there. We can go up to this random mode at the top, or D on the keyboard. And then now if we left click, hold, and paint around, we're going to see that we get some variations between these 3 tiles appearing. So we can also see that the main tile appears most of the time. And roughly speaking, the 3 dots appears 10% of the main tile. And then the one with this little tile damage, or the crevice in the middle, whatever you want to call it, should theoretically appear about half of the time of this 3 dots tile. So by setting the probability, you can kind of determine how often each of those are going to appear on your final tile map. And this can just be a really easy way to get some variation using different tiles that are related and just painting on your map without having to manually place each of these crevice tiles or the 3 dot tiles, wherever you want to appear. Of course, you can always go back in and individually paint on the tile that you want to override the randomness. But using the random mode can be a quick way to get basically the look you want without having to manually place every single tile. So likewise, we can do something very similar in Godot. So in Godot, if you want to use those tiles and then to randomly paint them with a priority method, like before in tiled, then we'll first bring in your tile set image into your project. And then let's go ahead and create a tile map. So I'm going to create a new scene in the top left. Let's just do new scene there. So node 2D is fine. I'm going to add a tile map to that. And the tile map is going to need a tile set. So just like before, we need to create a tile set. On the right side, we can do that where it says tile set empty. So go to click on where it says empty and then do new tile set. Let's click on that, open it up. And now we bring our tile variations image in here. Before we start creating the atlas tiles, let's make sure that everything is set to 16 by 16 pixels like we originally drew this tile set. So clicking on the tile map, we can open up cell on the right and make sure this is 16 by 16 so that when we draw it, it's going to be 16 by 16 squares. So click there, open up tile set. Okay, I guess it didn't save here. So you might want to Control S when you start creating your tile set file. And I'll just call this tile map test1.tscn. So saving the scene file. And now we're going to want to create a new atlas. So over here on the right, click new atlas. We define a region. So it's going to be these 3 in the bottom left. So you should get 16 by 16 squares. If you don't see it like that, or it's not selecting properly, then we can make sure that this step over here on the right is 16 by 16. Not sure if the subtile size matters there as well, but that is 16 by 16 here. Anyway, you should be able to select these 16 by 16 squares individually. So you hit new atlas and then you left click, drag until you have these 3 squares selected, or however many you need for your tile atlas. So now we can define the priority of each one. So click on priority, and now we need to give each of these tiles a parts of the total probability. So if I want to do out of 20, where each part is going to be 5%, then I just take the first tile and I increase this to 17 if I want that to be 17 out of 20 or a 85% chance. Then the second one, okay, it actually seems like the region wasn't quite right. So I'm going to go back to region and make sure this selects all 3 squares. Now we can go back to priority, click on the second region, and now we can increase the number of priority there. So the second one has a 2 out of 20, the third one has a 1 out of 20, and the first one has a 17 out of 20. So you can imagine that this first tile is going to appear a lot more than the other 2, and this crevice tile is going to appear the least. So now if we click on our tile map, we have our tile atlas over here. In order to draw randomly with the priority selected, rather than having to manually paint each of the tiles, make sure you have enable priority checked here. If you don't have enable priority checked, you're going to see the individual tiles and you can click from them to draw onto your tile map like so. But if you have enable priority, then it's going to be randomly selecting between all of your tiles in the atlas based on their priority. So now if I draw like this, you should see the majority of the time we get that main blue tile, but sometimes we get the crevice tile or the three dots tile to appear. So if you want to fill this in really quickly, we could just use the paint bucket fill tool and left click here. Then we fill in the other sides, still randomly selecting some of these other tiles. So that can be basically how you can use random tile variations in your tile set. And once you've filled in everything on your tile map, if you want to go back in and fix the tiles so that it looks a little less randomized, then you can just disable priority, select the tile you want, and paint over the tiles where you want that to be replaced because it just looks a little off there. Like maybe you shouldn't have two crevice tiles by the other crevice tiles. So that's going to be it on the basics of creating and using pixel art floor tiles with shadows and random tile variations as well. So I hope you got something out of this video. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in my future video content.